Basically what this talk is about is single-player RPGs, because this is the world where I live. These are my favorite games that I like to play. You'll notice a lot of BioWare titles, and that's because I'm a narrative designer, and I just really appreciate the work that they do. So my work in romance has been exclusively in the area of single-player role-playing games. Now, how did I come to want to study this? Well, this all began as a class project. 2 years ago, I was sitting where you folks are. I went to college at the age of 39. I hadn't been to college. My youngest child went to kindergarten. I went to college. And for a 100-level communications class, there was an assignment. It was study any area of media that interests you and report on your results. And I was like, oh my God, I get to study games and get graded on it. How cool is this? And I thought about romance and games, and I thought that was something I might like to study. So I thought about, how am I going to build a good case to my professor about why this is important to study? And what I told her was, unfortunately she allowed it, you can learn about player motivation and behavior. You can learn, this romance stuff that we see in Dragon Age. Is it really important? Do people really like it? And if they like it, how much do they like it? I didn't know. I wanted to find out. And you can identify patterns and models that can help improve romance in games as we know it. I didn't really have any kind of clear direction or hypothesis when I started this. I just kind of had an intellectual question that I wanted to investigate. I started thinking about my own gaming behavior. I compared it to a few of my friends to see, are you experiencing the same kind of craziness that I am? And then I decided to turn it into a bigger study. And I realized, this might actually be a thing. Now, before I go further, who in here, let me see a show of hands, who's ever had a crush on a video game character? Oh, good, I'm not the only one. So glad to hear that. It's happened to me 9 times. Here are the characters that it's happened to me with. Atten Rand, of course, from KOTOR, and Bishop from Neverwinter 2, and Sky from Jade Empire, and Gan of Dreams from Neverwinter 2, and of course, Andronicus from Star Wars, and the rest of them are pretty much all from Dragon Age. Yeah, I really do like the NPC romance. But I noticed something when I thought about all the NPC crushes that I ever had. These are not men who would ever be practical to pursue in real life for a variety of reasons, right? And so 8 of the 9 were these really flawed creatures that in real life I would never consider going out with an evil guy or a violent guy or someone who's a terrorist. I just wouldn't do it. But there was one, Alistair from Dragon Age, who I was so obsessed with, I played the entire Dragon Age game through 3 times just to make my romance with Alistair turn out the way I wanted it to. Yeah. And so what I did was, I wanted to know, why is there a disconnect? Why am I most of the time attracted to these really unsavory characters, but the one that I'm really attracted to, I was obsessed with? What's going on here? So I wanted to look up source material on romance and games and stuff, and I realized I couldn't find any. Now, what that meant was one of 2 things. Either my mentors in the industry could point me to resources, or is it possible that I've kind of come up with a new question that needs to be asked? So I took it to some people in the industry. I was very lucky, incredibly lucky, to have my entry in the industry be with mentors like Jesse Schell and Sherry Ray, who's also here, and Jennifer Hepler from BioWare. They encouraged me very much and showed me that, yeah, you know what, this might be a thing, so go investigate this. So that's what I did. And what I did was, I developed a survey on SurveyMonkey that was all about romance in games. Who are you attracted to in game? Who are you attracted to in real life? Who are you in real life? Who are you when you're in games? Just all kinds of questions about that to try to unpack this a little bit. And what I did was, again, use SurveyMonkey, and there are good and bad things about using SurveyMonkey. It's easy to design, it's easy to get people to participate, it's anonymous, so you can answer however you want, and the data is really easy when they give it to you to make sense of. But it's honesty dependent, it's not scientific, And people can either skip the questions or retake the survey that might throw you off. So I don't consider this a scientific survey by any means. What I did was I surveyed 525 gamers, and I did this by making little business cards that I passed out at the 2012 GDC, telling people what the study was about and just seeing if they'd participate. I posted it in the BioWare social network because a lot of the games that I was dealing with were BioWare, and then I had some help from people publicizing it in the social network. So I got 525 respondents. Now, a little bit about those respondents. Come on. Where is it? Okay, well, that's not coming up, but here's what I'll tell you. They were 60% female and 40% male. 74% of them identified as straight. Roughly 55% of them were romantically attached. And basically the composite of an average respondent was a 21-year-old female gamer who was romantically attached with a male partner. I don't know why that didn't show up. Okay, now one question that I asked was, what gender character do you prefer to play when you're playing a single-player RPG? And nearly 70% of them said female, which means that you do have a degree of overlap, and that overlap is happening with men. You have men who are playing female characters, and this supports Nick Yee's work in MMOs and role-playing. And the difference between my work and Nick Yee's, obviously, is that he's dealing with MMOs and I'm dealing with single-player RPGs. But it's interesting to note that men are playing female characters and females are playing almost exclusively female characters. Do you or would you ever role-play a character with a gender different to your real-life gender? Only 18% said never. And that means that 82% of the players are changing it up at least some of the time. Now, that is how they identify in-game, but I wanted to go a little bit further. Would you ever romance a different gender character than you would in real life? Now, 71% of these respondents, again, identified as straight. Only 6% of respondents say that they always romance straight. So that means that 94% of players who I surveyed are mixing it up, and they're playing homosexual or bisexual romance options sometimes, which I found to be very interesting. I wanted to break it out a little bit further, and while female couples do experience their popularity, the players do seem to mix things up. When you have a female player playing a female NPC or romancing a female NPC, you have a male player romancing a male NPC, it happens pretty often. Now, one of the things that I did for my most recent talk at GDC was I separated out the data by gender. And so I'm going to share some of that information here today. 25% of the women who I surveyed identified as bisexual. And several of the women surveyed said that the reason that they romance female to female is that they're bisexual in real life, but they're monogamous with a male partner. And the only way that they can express that other side of their sexuality is to romance women in games, which I thought was pretty fascinating. Now, Lisa Nakamura is a gaming scholar who invented a term called identity tourism. She says that identity tourism is the process of appropriating another identity on the web, and more specifically, an identity involving another gender and or race other than one's own, particularly on the internet and in video games. Now, she asserts that it's a bad thing when players engage in it while playing MMOs that are connected with other human beings on the other side of a computer because she thinks it's unethical, she thinks it's deceptive, she thinks that you are pretending to be something that you're not and getting a false sense of being the other when you're in that kind of MMO situation. And there was an essay by a man called Phil Alexander in the book World of Warcraft and Philosophy, where he cited Lisa Nakamura's work because he wrote an essay about his experiences playing a female character in World of Warcraft, and he experienced that same kind of identity tourism problem that Nakamura talks about. However, what I wondered, can identity tourism ever be a good thing? Let's think about that for a minute. When you remove the ethical cost involved with having a real person at the other end of the transaction, Then you have a safe, private opportunity to experiment with gender and sexuality. And playing single-player RPGs lets you do that. So I believe that there is a case, a specific case, where identity tourism can be a good thing. Now, in the United States, I don't know if you've all read about this, but over the last 3 to 5 years, we have had an awful lot of young kids who are gay or kids who are perceived by others to have been gay, who have been killing themselves. And this is a terrible, terrible thing that needs to stop. And I think that one of the ways that people might have a safe space to experiment with their sexuality is in these single-player role-playing games. I think that that's a safe space that people haven't talked about enough. And I think that's why it's important for us to include these romances in these games that aren't necessarily of the binary. Now, speaking of binaries, I'm going to take a sidestep for a minute. When I split the data out in terms of male and female, that's a binary, and I recognize that. I did ask everybody when they were identifying their gender, do you identify as male, female, and I gave a list of options. Only 3% identified as something other than male and female, so I didn't have any meaningful data that I could provide that was outside of that binary, so I apologize for that. I would like to see there be meaningful data in that way. Maybe we'll see some at some point. So takeaway number one here is that identity tourism can be a good thing because it helps people's self-awareness and their tolerance levels. Now, getting into romance and how important it is to people in games. A lot of people said that it was important. Only about 7% of respondents said that it was not that important or not at all important. And that kind of means that NPC romance does have some degree of importance to 93% of players. So in terms of the overall game, it's kind of like icing on a cake, right? When you're playing Mass Effect, for instance, the romance that you got going on isn't the main meat of the story in Mass Effect. It's just kind of this side thing that's kind of cool to also do. It's like icing on the cake. And what that tells us is most people are happy to eat the cake and the icing on the cake too. What we did find is romance is important. 89% romance to see where the story goes. As Tom Abernathy said right before me, story being important. 80% say romances add depth to their gameplay. 76% do it for entertainment. In other words, if you write the content, you've got players who will play it just because it's there. 60% have felt connection. Boy, that's really bad grammar. 60% have felt a connection to a romanceable NPC, and 53% find NPC romance emotionally stimulating. They thought that the most appealing things about NPC romance, personality, dialogue, integration of that romance into the larger narrative of the game, voice and accent, backstory. Believe it or not, the visuals were at the bottom. That kind of surprised me in a good way. Now, here's where I broke the data out again by gender. Here are the similarities between how men and women see romance and why they romance in these games. Both genders do feel emotional connections to the game characters, though it happens less frequently with men. Both genders are turned off by religious characters. Both genders find romance to be an important component, but for different reasons. And both genders experiment with gender and sexuality, but again, in different ways and for different reasons. Now, here were the differences in how men and women romance and why. Women connect with game characters and book characters to the same level. Men connect with game characters and movie characters to the same level. Women tend to romance for story and emotional fulfillment, while men tend to do it more for story, but also the in-game benefits that might happen with a romance. Like in Dragon Age, for example, if you romance to a certain degree, you'll get a buff from romancing that particular character. And the men tend to like those buffs. Women experiment a whole lot with romance, but they role play characters who are a lot closer to who they are in real life. Men don't experiment a lot with romance. They tend to stick traditional romance, but they will also experiment a lot with who they role play as. Women are much less likely to hide their NPC romance from their real-life partner or be jealous of their partner's NPC romance, but men admitted that they will hide their game romance from their significant other, and they are sometimes jealous if they feel that their significant other is spending a little too much time with Alistair. Not that that's happened. Now, romance in games, I think, can appeal to 4 out of the 5 basic human needs in Maslow's hierarchy of needs that was developed in 1943. Self-actualization, self-esteem, a sense of love and belonging, and also under physiological, sex is there, and I figured, you know what, that counts. So 4 out of 5 deep psychological needs that human beings have can be satisfied by NPC romance. So my takeaway number 2 is that romance is important in single-player RPGs. Now, back to this disconnect, remember, where I was saying I would never go for these crazy men like this, but then there's Alistair. There was that disconnect. I still got to go back and do something about that disconnect. And I decided to think more about the things that attract us, the things that repel us, how that works in a game versus how that works in real life. So I got an idea, and I decided how to unpack things a little bit. I was thinking more about that New York Times article, the one that I told you guys about, with how they said the World of Warcraft is the better matchmaker. I realized something about Match.com when I was thinking about that. And people go there in order to say who they are, and they list qualities that would be attractive in a potential partner using personality tests. So what I did is I went on Match.com, and I signed up on Match.com in order to get access to their personality tests, and I stole their descriptive adjectives off their personality tests in order to use them in my work. And what I did was I used these adjectives, I listed them all out, I asked respondents to describe, do you describe yourself as this adjective in real life? Do you describe yourself as this character when you're playing, does this adjective apply when you're playing a game? Is this adjective something that you find attractive in a game character? Is this adjective something that you would find attractive in a real life partner? So I asked them to rank those 4 things for each of these adjectives that I found on Match.com, and here's what I found. People consider themselves in real life the descriptors in pink. Ooh, it's not pink up here. It's yellow, okay, in yellow, 50% or greater. People prefer to play characters with the descriptors in blue, which is 50% or greater, and the descriptors in the middle area are the ones that people applied pretty equally to both themselves and their avatars that they choose to play. So I started thinking about what does this mean to narrative design, to narrative designers like myself whose job it is to write these romances. What does it mean? We don't just have to write the NPCs that you're trying to romance and get with. We have to write the player's side of the conversation too, the player's side of the relationship too. And in Dragon Age, again, I'm sorry I keep going back to Dragon Age, I know, but it's my favorite game and it's familiar. We get, anytime that you're conversing in Dragon Age, you get 3 responses, right? You get the do-gooder response, you get the evil response, and then you get the smart-ass response, which is always my favorite one. This allows the NPC characters and the story to react according to the personality choices that we've made for ourselves during the game. So when you're designing player characters, use the descriptors in the blue circle. And here's why you should do that. Dr. Jane McGonigal explains that people's game avatars are their personal ideal, who they aspire to be and who they are evolving toward. So if you make the player side of the relationship more aspirational in nature, that will appeal to people, according to Dr. McGonigal's work. Next, I asked respondents to rate the adjectives in terms of whether they found it attractive or unattractive in a real-life partner. And you see here, there's a list of things that they did find attractive, there's a list of things they didn't find attractive, and then there were some that it just didn't matter so much. Although when you break the data out by gender, it was kind of funny. Men really like kooky women. Women don't like kooky men. Women really like inquisitive men. Men don't like inquisitive women. Now, you have a whole lot of descriptors that you can use which people find attractive, but I think the more interesting thing to look at here is that there are some descriptors considered unattractive in a partner that might make for some interesting conflict if you manage them carefully. And here's why that is. In her work with archetype writing, Carolyn Kaufman applies Jungian archetype to romance writing. And now she's talking about romance books, okay? But I think about romance games. I think it could apply equally. She credits the shadow personality as being the seat of creativity and imagination, which people use when they're playing through storylines. And because Jung, and also by extension Kaufman, says that processing and balancing the shadow personality are essential to balancing our personalities as human beings, it's possible that strong conflicts, solving them involve the shadow qualities will make for a richer and more rewarding experience when you're playing through these. Therefore, when you're designing these relationships between the player and the NPC and folding them into the meta story arc, focus on conflicts around the descriptors that imply the shadow personality. Although I will say there were some universally disliked descriptors, and I would say they might be a hard sell in the traditional sense. So if you're going to use them, be very careful about using them. Either don't use them or be careful. Just use them wisely. Next, I asked people to rate these same adjectives in terms of whether they would be attractive or unattractive in an NPC. And here's what we came up with. Notice that people don't care if their romanceable NPC is violent or sleeps around, as long as they're affectionate and communicative and can kick some ass in a fight. Here, so those are the ones that you should use when you're designing your NPC, because they're the things that people find attractive in an NPC. Now, the reason why you should do that relates to Jason Vandenberg, who I understand was at this same conference last year. Wonderful guy, creative director for Ubisoft. He gave a mind-blowing talk at last year's GGC and again this year about using Big Five personality theory to find a continuum that defines different player motivations. Now, we can apply his theory to this set of descriptors and find ways to use the descriptors to craft satisfying endings for a romance. Each of the Big Five personality categories in Vandenberg's lecture was one he associated with a specific player motivation, and I took that concept one step further into NPC romance. We can find types of NPC romances that satisfy each of those 8 motivations on both sides of the continuums that he was talking about. Using Vandenberg's model, having these 8 specific romance types in your game will satisfy all romance types. So he says, for instance, that if your Big Five score is high in neuroticism, then your motivation is threat, and in that case, that type of player is really going to like a dark story or a bad ending. Whereas if you have a very high openness score, your main motivation is going to be novelty, and then apply that to romance, and they are going to look for unconventional characteristics with strange or funny backstories. That's one way to address that motivation. So, my last takeaway here is that everything I've studied does add up to what I believe could be an interesting model that narrative designers can use to create better and more satisfying NPC romances. You'll remember at the beginning of the talk, I said that single-player RPGs were kind of like a cake, right? They're like a cake, but the romance is like the icing on the cake. Well, I decided to call my model the icing model because it's icing on the content cake. Yep. Now I'm going to give you the recipe, and I just put it in because it looks yummy, and I bet everybody in here wants cake now. I could use cake. All right. Here are the steps that I've learned to take, both from college screenwriting courses that I took and experience with game writing that I've had at Shell Games, and from several books on game writing that I've read in order to be better at what I do. I think that BioWare as a company does do that pretty well, and I think BioWare deserves a place in any conversation about NPC romance, because 75% of the respondents cited BioWare titles as those they've played with. 55% of all responses were from BioWare's 3 specific titles: Mass Effect, Dragon Age, and Knights of the Old Republic. I love their games, but I think that even BioWare can do a little bit better with NPC romance. We need female characters to be less disposable, less Ashley from Mass Effect, and more really interesting characters with agency, like Morrigan from Dragon Age. I think that BioWare is getting better, but I think there's still a little bit more ways to go in thinking outside the binary and offering a lot more choices. But anyway, the icing model. First of all, the I is inclusiveness that we discussed with Lisa Nakamura and identity tourism, kind of flipping it on its head with single-player RPGs. If you are more inclusive, it can be something helpful because players are doing what they prefer. They want to experiment. The C is for writing character perspective, because we're not just writing the other characters, we're also writing the player's side of this interaction. And so we remember Jane McGonigal's advice about the aspirational avatar. The second I is for interference, or introducing conflict when you're constructing the romance story, and that goes back again to Carolyn Kaufman's work on archetypes in romance. We are drawn to the shadow qualities because of that deep psychological need to balance the two sides. So using the very qualities that we find unattractive in real partners, we can develop irresistible conflicts. However, and not using universally hated descriptors, or else using them very carefully, can also keep us from turning off players. It's a really delicate balance. I'm still learning to negotiate it. The G is for gratifying endings, which we can construct with the help of Jason Vandenberg's work in player motivations. Now, here's a sidebar where when I looked at the data between male data and female data, I wanted to see what could we specifically do for men, what could we specifically do for women in order to make NPC romance more satisfying. For the benefit of both men and women, improve the female characters. Again, less disposable, more agency. For the benefit of men specifically, make the choices in romance high risk and high reward. Include access to exclusive equipment or weaponry, not just buffs. There are some games that I think have done this okay, like in Dragon Age where you get buffs, or in Star Wars where you get buffs for having a romance in the game. But there are other games like Skyrim. Have people got any Skyrim fans in here? A few? Oh yeah, I love it. Skyrim is one case where I think they really could have done a lot more with romance. You've got this company that put together this incredible game where you can see every blade of grass, and they have 1,000 books. 1,000 collectible books in Skyrim that you can collect and you can read. But you can also get married in the game, and it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't add anything at all. There's really no reason to do it. So it's like, why did you do it at all? There isn't any reason to do it. My theory with Skyrim is if they would have cut it down from 1,000 collectible books to 750 collectible books and taken that staff resource and made romance matter, I think that they would have had a lot more people interested in Skyrim and interested in pursuing that part of the game. For the benefit of women, but also ultimately for everyone, make more romance choices outside the binary. I'm one of these crazy women who wanted a romanceable Arashok. Don't ask me why, I just like to experiment. And I found in the survey that a lot of women do. It doesn't have to be all traditional races or traditional genders. It doesn't have to be, because women in particular like to experiment. And I think that anytime you inject diversity into a game, you're not just helping one specific group, you're helping everyone, because it's a tolerance thing. So now that we know that people like experimenting, now that we know that romance is important, we can make tastier icing on the content cake. So let the meat cake. I do have some special thanks to give to the people on the screen here who helped me put everything together. And I certainly want to thank everybody here at the university for inviting me, because this has been an incredible experience. I do have works cited. I also do share my slides, so there's my contact information. So if anybody wants to contact me, I do share my slides, and I like talking about this stuff with anyone, because I think that having more voices in this conversation is an incredibly important thing, and I would welcome that very much. I want to hear what other people have to say and what other people have to contribute. I also put this slide up here because, unfortunately, I forgot to pack business cards. So if anybody wants to contact me, that's how you can do it. And I will open the floor up to questions if anyone has any. Thank you. I guess we have a microphone set up over here for anyone who has questions.
Hello.
Hi.
I was just wondering if you ever tried to enter the data for Alistair's personality into Match.com to see if there's anyone.
That's a really good idea. I have to try that. That's fantastic.
Okay.
It's a good idea. Of course, these days I don't know how I'd be able to get away with being on Match.com without having my significant other grow very suspicious. Hello.
Hi. Oh, sorry. My name is Mal Lamberg, and I did a bachelor thesis about male sexualization in video games. So this is really interesting to hear about. Thank you.
Oh, cool. Thanks.
And what I found when I looked into it was that wasn't really much Western stuff about video games and sexualization for men. So I checked into, you said automated games is not what you've looked at, but I found this really interesting thing about manga, where females are more inclined, and it's even targeted towards yaoi, which is two men engaging with each other sexually. And I read why, and there was this article about it that said that females feel more relaxed, like they don't have to have what inclines to be a female and engaging with a man. So they were free of all the limitations of being a female. And I was wondering, because in the Western society now, manga is getting more in there, and this new generation is coming into these RPGs that are growing bigger and bigger. Do you think they will change more with homosexual relationships and stuff?
It's very interesting you say that, because actually the talk that I'm working on right now for GDC Europe is about romance games, because in the East, in Japan, they're ridiculously wildly successful, as you noted. But in the West, in America, they fail. Mm-hmm. They've failed every time. I mean, sure, you've got these great, popular games like the BioWare titles that are wildly successful, but you can't really call those romance games, because that's only one small part of what the whole game is, right? Every time there's been a shot at doing just a dedicated romance game in the United States, it's failed. And so what I'm trying to do right now is figure out why, based on the work that I've done, because I think it could work, and I think it could change, and I think it will change, and I really want to be involved with that when it does. But yeah, I see that as well in the things that I'm doing, and it's going to be interesting to feel that out a little bit further.
Looking forward to listening to it. Thank you.
Anybody else? Questions?
Yeah, hi. The romances that you use, you talk about, are side ones, the optional ones that you can engage with if you want to. Is there a difference between how people respond to romances that are part of the main narrative, like the main line of the video game, as opposed to the side ones that you can engage with if you want to? Do you know if there's a difference between that?
I think a lot of people play the romance because it's there, and I don't know if they play it because they like it or they play it because it's there. That was the part that was unclear to me, kind of like in that movie, In the Field of Dreams, where if you build it, they will come. It's kind of like the chicken and the egg. I don't know what comes first, whether people play it because it's there or people really like it and so they play it. It could be one or the other. I do think that, as Tom Abernathy said right before my talk, is that people are very interested in story, and one of the main reasons I found as far as why these romances are important is they want to see how it folds into the bigger, meta-narrative of the whole story, and that's one of the main reasons to do the romance when you're playing, is because often that will change your larger experience based on what you're doing right here. I know in Dragon Age it changes it big time depending on how you operate. So yeah, I do think that that's important to people. Does that answer your question?
Well, I was more curious about if people still feel the same connection to the romancing if it's not optional, but if it's built into the actual main narrative, that it's something that you can't skip.
That's a really good question that I'm not sure about. What I can say is that 93% of the people do find it to be important in some regard, which means that if it's optional, they're probably going to do it for the variety of reasons that I outlined. So I do think that people enjoy it. I think that to force people into a romance is probably not a good thing unless you're offering them very interesting choices to be able to do that. And I think it might be possible to do that. We'll see. My next big playthrough is going to be a game called Persona 4, which I've read an awful lot about. And I think that's going to teach me even more about this field that I'm kind of investigating right now. So, yeah, I think it'll be interesting.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hello. My question is about, as many of you know, I'm a religious type. And yeah, it starts being on the bad category. So I was thinking, but then I thought, I've never liked a character because he or she is religious or chaste or whatever. They're so one-dimensional, really. And so I thought, how to make characters, even if they're chaste or religious, how to make them more romantic. I mean, just because they're being religious doesn't mean they don't have
I think
feelings.
it depends on how fully you integrate that into the character. Is that their main reason for being alive, or is it just, okay, you've got this character who is smart and sexy and funny, but they're also religious?
Yeah.
There's a difference there. I know that when I played through the Exiled Prince in Dragon Age, I'm sorry, too much Dragon Age. God, I did it again. When I played through the Exiled Prince, I was really pissed off at the end.
What happened?
And I don't know how much spoiler I should offer about that, but there is an ending that involves the degree of Sebastian's religious dedication that kind of negates anything that I would hope to get going with him.
Okay. Okay, so it's really about adding more of these layers to the character. Then, because I was wondering, is it the religious adjective itself that is bad, or because they're so one-dimensional, they're so...
That's a good question, because I didn't really qualify any of these adjectives with people, right? I just threw the adjective up there and said, tell me what you think about it. And another thing to keep in mind is that different people are going to negotiate different meanings to a word.
Of course, yeah.
So there might be some people who answered the survey for whom religious sets off some kind of internal alarm bells in them as a person. So you can't be completely sure whether religious as a word is bad or whether it's just, it rubs some people the wrong way. You just don't have any way of knowing. It's just one of those things that you pay attention to and see what people like, and it's one of those problems that extreme play testing can probably
fair enough, yeah.
bring to light.
Right, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, so definitely play Persona 4, but this kind of ties into my question, which is why I got up. Do you have any data on people who choose to pursue multiple partners in these games? Because with the BioWare games, usually you have to pick one, and they don't let you pursue, but I felt like in Persona 4, it was not enough for me to have just one girlfriend. Like, I wanted many. Mm-hmm. So did you look into that at all, or have you considered looking into that, like games where you can have a harem versus...
No, I did not explore the question of polyamory in my research, but it is an interesting question. And, I'm sorry, but I kind of wanted to, see Alistair and Leiliana at the same time. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, BioWare won't let you do it.
What the heck? Yeah, I think that might yield some interesting data.
Cool.
At some point. Any other questions? Anything?
Hi. So I was kind of curious about the part because since you seem to have a lot of experience in Dragon Age, I was curious about like how you look on the character Severin in his like connection to the character when he comes in.
I'm sorry, which character?
Zevran, the elf that you meet up.
Yeah.
Because the interesting part for me was that that was the first time I experienced like a bisexual character in a game.
Huh, okay.
And what I want to know is like, what do you think about that part when there's actually a bisexual character that, because what's interesting about him is, I'm not gonna try to spoil so much about it, but he specifically has a lot of, he kind of provokes the character in a lot of ways and like really experiments and provoke the bisexual tension. And the interesting part about that, if you actually give him a chance to like redeem himself as a character in your party, he does different things.
Yeah.
Depending on that situation. So the question would be, do you think that those kind of provocations in games is like, if there's something that the game industry could use? So
I do. I think that it's valuable, and the reason I think that it's valuable is that there are people out there who are questioning, who are curious, you know? And again, that's because of the identity tourism question, I think it's a safe space where people can explore that kind of headspace and wrap their own heads around what it means to them, if in fact it means anything at all to them. It's a safe way for them to do that. If they are not confident or feeling safe enough to do that in the real world, it's something that they can do in the world of their own mind. And that's something that can provoke, you know, thoughts and answers to questions in their own lives. I do think that it's valuable. And I think that it's valuable to include all different kinds of things on the continuum, whether you're talking about men, women, just pansexual. I would like to see there be options that I refer to as pansexual, which are, you know, whether that be a transsexual, whether that be a non-gender character, I would like to see all kinds of options. I don't think we're there yet, but that's what I'd like to see, because I think that there are people who want to explore that space.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hi, Heidi. I have a question for you. Some of the things we've been hearing in some of the talks have been talking about the fact that one of the fastest growing markets is women over the age of 30. If we tie that to what we know about the publishing genre and the rapidly growing or the very huge genre of romance books, my question is, do you think there's an opportunity for us to start seeing NPC partners offered who are older? Because I don't know about you, but when I play Tor, I get really tired of dating the 17-year-olds. I'm always like, I don't want you, I want your boss.
Are you kidding me? I've been crushing on Captain Picard since I was 18 years old.
But I mean, we don't see very often, do we see older characters represented? Do you think this is an opportunity that we might be missing?
I definitely see an opportunity for that. I mean, you know, there's not just an opportunity for all genders and all sexualities, but all ages, all body types, just diversity in general. More choice is always a good thing. Always.
Well, my question is, as I played another Bioware game, Mass Effect, is that different from being Dragon Age, where you play a different story every time. As I play Mass Effect, you play the same story through the whole series. And what I like about it is that if you romance or have a different relationship with someone in, say, Mass Effect 1, that changes as you progress through the game, and you see how the romance or the relationship changes the story from Mass Effect 2 or 3. Mm-hmm. What do you think about that in terms of
I think that's awesome and interesting. One of the things that I have been asking, because I've been talking to a bunch of people about this idea of could romance games ever work? And somebody named Lee Sheldon, who has written a really good book about narrative design, I recommend to anyone because I keep it really close to me and I refer to it a lot. I talked to him about that and I said, well, what do you think about romance in games and so forth. And he said that one of the reasons he thinks it could work is that the internet itself is a big romance in games, right? We're all dating online now and trying to progress relationships over the long term, using the internet more and more. So, I mean, if it's happening in real life, I definitely think it could happen in games over the course of a franchise, or maybe they want to mix it up and bring in totally different characters in the second time like they did with Dragon Age. But yeah, I totally see that could happen. And it might be something that's very compelling to do, because then you have a history with this game and you have a history with this character. And the more history you have with that character, the more it's going to matter to you, right? Because you've invested that time, just like in a real person. The more time you invest in this real person, the more history you have with this real person, the more meaningful the real person is to you. And I certainly think that carries over to the virtual space.
Yeah, on a personal note, I started playing Mass Effect from Mass Effect 2 and forward. And then I noticed through the 2 and 3, well, I missed something because I didn't start at the beginning. So after playing through 2 and 3 many times, I thought, well, let's play it through the beginning and create different relationships. And the experience, even if you just have a few changes in scenes, it just felt totally new.
Yeah, I think that's something that could be very exciting for players.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I've probably got time for one more, if there are any. Okay, well, thank you. Thank you very much.